I think the break is more popular than our session. But right after this session is the minister, and so we will have to finish right on time. So we'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel on Beyond the Algorithm, People-Centered Design in an Age of AI. My name is Zeynab Ziaie Moayyed. I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Artificial Intelligence Monitor for Immigration in Canada and internationally. So my work focuses a lot on the use of AI and automated decision-making in administrative law, and specifically within the immigration context. In this session, the work that we'll be discussing is going beyond whether AI is efficient and whether it's fair, transparent, accountable, and centered on the people that it affects. And today's panel asks a simple but important question. As AI becomes more embedded in access to justice, in legal information, and in decision-making, how do we design systems in this new reality? Our fantastic panel of speakers will help us think through how innovation can be guided by human values and the lived experience of the people justice systems are meant to serve. We're very lucky today to be joined by our speakers. I'm going to introduce them briefly. They might also speak a bit more about their work as part of their presentations, but we have Christiane Saad. She is the Director of Justice at the Association of Colleges and Universities of the Canadian Francophonie. Christiane works at the intersection of law, technology, privacy, governance, and access to justice, and recently completed her master's degree in law and technology, focused on AI and automated decision-making in the justice system. Come in, we got started early. Next, we have Dr. Matthew Dylag, the assistant professor at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University. His research focuses on access to justice and the integration of emerging technologies into the justice sector. Matthew's work examines the ethical, equality, human rights, and rule of law implications of AI and the legal services and justice systems. And finally, we have Drew Jackson, who's the digital and content lead at the People's Law School in British Columbia. Drew is both a lawyer and librarian and has spent 2 decades advancing public legal education. At the People's Law School, he leads digital and content initiatives, including work with a Gen AI-powered Beagle Plus chatbot with a focus on helping people better understand and navigate everyday legal problems. As I said, we do have to finish right on time, so I will turn it right over to Christiane to get us started.
Thank you, Zeynab, and it's really a privilege to me to be talking to you today to provide some of the insights that we have from my work at the association and generally in the justice system, and to share this panel. So, just to give you some context of where I'm coming from. So, law is my second career. The previous one was in urban planning, urban design. So public and people-centered services and design was embedded with what we do. So when we have a title for a presentation or a conference with people-centered justice, we know that something went wrong at some point. And we hear that for the past 2 days during this presentation, and we understand what went wrong. So as part of, so this is the clicker, sorry about that. So part of my work at the Association of Colleges and Universities of the Canadian Francophonie is really bridging the gaps for access to justice. Our goal is to, break silos, have our members, so different actors in the justice system, work together to improve access to justice in terms of training, language skills for lawyers to be able to provide legal services in French, prepare tools, and basically work together. So our model is a more collaborative and horizontal or lateral collaboration model than a vertical one. So these are where I come from in terms of work and why I'm interested in AI. So I've been working on AI, yes, I worked on automated decision-making from a research point of view. But previously, I also looked at AI in terms of tech competency for training future lawyers, so part of the licensing process in Ontario. I also look at AI with the data that might influence and the decisions that might influence minority communities, such as the Francophone community in Canada. So these are some of the perspectives that I will look at. So people-centered justice, you are the experts. I will not dive deeply into this topic, but I will help you see that you are not very far from the knowledge and the skills you need to really understand how AI will impact, this, and how it can help people-centered justice. So nothing new on this slide. You already know what people-centered justice is, what we are aiming for. We have the key principles that we want to see in our justice system, in our processes, in our institutions. We want to involve, we want to hear people who will be impacted by our services, by our decisions. But what we see today with the AI integration, today it's AI, tomorrow it's something else, we have all this technology. What's really different with AI is the pervasiveness of it and the fast pace of implementation that's inhumane. Like it's going so fast, but at the same time, when we look at the actual impacts, it's kind of slow. It's not very like when we look at the day-to-day impacts on each task or process, yes, there are some changes, major changes, but overall, we are still seeing the same obstacles. So here we are trying, and I have no artistic talent, so bear with me with this graph. So we have to try, we want to balance between the drive for systemic change, improvement, re-engineering the processes that are not going right. But we also are looking for the human dignity. We want this people-centered justice principles embedded in this. But we are facing many challenges, and we hear some of them as well in the general challenges with people-centered justice. We see the embeddedness of biases and discriminating algorithm, okay? And when I'm talking about AI use, it's not only for legal professionals. We know that we now use it for research, analysis, predictive, but we also see it overall in the justice system, in policing, in risk assessment, and so on. So we see all these biases that come from the data, from the teams who are working on implementing the AI solutions, the processes, as well from the system itself, the way we make decisions, the way we engage with people, the way we integrate every community and everyone involved and impacted within the conversation and the development of these systems. I work also as a privacy lawyer, so the issues of privacy, confidentialities, it's really key here. And the right-based approach embedded in the system. The lack of transparency, you all heard about this black, opaque box. We don't know how the system works. So we try to make it more transparent and try to explain and make it traceable how we came up with a decision, for example. And of course, we have the accountability piece that's really key. Who is responsible of the outcome, but also of each step of the process, whatever it might be. So looking at the principles of people-centered justice, how we can, do we need to shift? Is it something new from following the integration of AI? Not really. It's just we need to reinterpret these principles, looking at algorithms and have better protections and being more inclusive. So it's the way we reinterpret these different components. I will go very fast. You have the slides, so you can refer to it. It's just as a toolbox. But in my reflection for this presentation, I looked like people-centered governance. It's not people-centered services, or it's not something new. We have it in public administration, in justice, and we even had presentation on everyday's disputes. So we have different challenges and what's the desired outcomes. We want an accessible, for example, resolution and build trust. The idea of trust is really key. Technological scaling, but it's also integrating fundamental rights within these processes. So keeping these governance frameworks, I looked at what are the models or the framework that we look at. So we have on one side, all types of people-centered justice maturity models. So how do we know what are the key principles or the key component of a good people-centered model? And I also looked at what we now look at good AI maturity models. What are the key components to have to say, well, this is a trustworthy system, a trustworthy solution, because it has different models. So you have the names of different models. So from the AI, because you're already familiar with the people-centered justice ones. So in AI, we hear a lot about, for example, NIST. So it's more of a standard. So it comes from the US. It's now a risk-based approach to assessing AI maturity in the implementation. We have, for example, the Gartner, and I'm not it's one of the ones that I often refer to, but because I find it kind of simple to understand on different level of implementation, going from simple awareness to really transformational approach. So looking at all these models, and I know it might be too small, but how we can look at people-centered justice, AI maturity rubric, like how we can mix both to find the key elements. And I will not go into the details right now, but the idea, what comes to my mind is that it's very similar to the challenges that we have, or the outcomes we are aiming for in our work in access to justice in general, focused on. So we want the human-centered governance. We want to hear from people. We want all these voices that who are missing from the conversation. And with AI, I think it's even key, and this is one of the actionable items that we should take into consideration, get people involved, and not only a few experts or a few organizations. Many people are not involved in national strategies on AI, or their voice are not heard. So, and when we are implementing local and very individual solutions in justice and AI, this is really key. Fairness and right protection. If you don't embed it within the system from the start, how can we ensure that these rights are protected? And you have like different levels, and the awareness level is we have no idea. Like we hear about AI, but we don't know exactly what it is. Going to the transformational level, and you have the different pillars, and access and inclusion, and the trust. So one of the key principles we are trying to find in these AI systems is this trust. Can we trust the system? And in other words, can we trust the institutions who are implementing these systems at the same time? So public trust metrics are really also important. In the previous panel here, we talked a lot about metrics, how we measure the outcome and how we can measure what's difficult to see being implemented. So these are things that we should be considering. So the adoption barriers that we see in AI, they are basically the same list that we are hearing during these 2 days. Like, can we trust the system and the legitimacy? The same issues that we are facing in general in people-centered justice. The legal, ethical, And the additional barrier is the regulatory uncertainty facing AI. We don't have, specific regulation for AI. We do have national directives on automated decision makings. Now we have guides for AI, generative AI, and last week we even have one for agentic AI, which is building on the generative AI and giving even more agency to these systems. So we need to, to focus also on that. Institutional resistance and culture. This is also key. Like when we don't understand the technology, when we are hearing messages that these technologies will replace our work, but we see at the same time that all the barriers that persist throughout the years, even with the new technologies, we might question that. And the skills, for example, and the training gap. How do we train? We hear about the training of future legal professionals. What are the skills? How do we implement the best competencies framework to teach these? I will not go into detail with change management, but this is also to keep in mind. I believe there's a panel on that as well. But one of the gaps that we see, so in change management, we start also with making the people, the teams, aware of the change, the required change, but it's also key to involve them. Otherwise, this is one of the key elements that will create barriers to the implementation. And if a process is broken and inefficient, or the workflow, even with the best shiny AI tool, you will not solve the problem. So start by looking at what's wrong with the process, with the interactions between different institutions, for example. Correct this, and then consider maybe implementing some AI tool. Training and empowering the people using and collaborating with AI. Look at AI as a teammate rather than a replacement or something that we will not use. And it's important to have this monitor continuously, like do the loop and review separately. And I think it's really important to focus on inclusive innovation and collaboration. I am involved in with different groups working on AI, from privacy to access to justice and others in between. And some of the observations is many people are missing from the table. They are not involved. They don't understand. They can't provide their perspective. We see the same people involved in the discussions, and this is a key problem we have. Not only we will lack a diverse point of view, but we will be missing and increasing the barriers and the divides. So the key takeaways are the same that you will be hearing throughout the conference. I've included some resources and will be happy to continue the conversation. And I can also take questions in French if you have any.
Thank you, Christiane. Matthew?
All right. How do we get to my slides? Work.
It's coming.
It's coming? It's loading?
It's a technology session.
AI will decide. Okay, well, now we're ahead of ourselves. There we go. Introductory. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our panel. My name is Matthew Dylag. As was mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at Dalhousie University, the Schulich School of Law, where I teach civil procedure and legal ethics. So I basically say I teach students how to sue other people, but how to sue ethically. My research interests, however, are very much in the idea of how technology is impacting the justice sector, which I examine through an access to justice lens, which leads me to this project that I wanted to talk about, this little project that I'm working on, where I'm trying to answer this research question of whether AI-generated legal advice can provide safe, reliable, and effective assistance to individuals who are experiencing a serious legal problem. Now, the context for this within an Access to Justice conference probably does not need to be dwelled upon, but just briefly, as everyone knows, the reality of the legal services market is that most Canadians are priced out of it. It's a broken market. Canadians can't afford legal advice. We know that the average hourly billing rate is somewhere from $250 to $700 per hour, which means, yes, Canadians cannot afford to see a lawyer. And even if they could afford to see a lawyer, it's economically irrational to do so unless it's an absolutely serious, serious problem. So partly because of that, and for all sorts of other reasons, many people are seeking non-formal methods of resolution. They're going to other places other than a lawyer and other than the courts to resolve their disputes. And one thing that I found interesting within the legal needs research is, well, this statistic is from a number of years ago, but about half of them are searching their problem online. I would suggest that's probably gone up to almost everyone is searching their problem online. And a number of years ago, that led me to examine a phenomena wherein people are going onto social media to ask their legal problems and they're crowdsourcing their legal advice. And that kind of horrified me to say, you're getting legal advice from a non-expert, anonymous source. But people were doing that. And so I wrote a paper on that. And this question just seems to be the natural sequel to it because AI chatbots are now ubiquitous and freely available and super easy to use. So I have no doubt that people are going on to ChatGPT or Cloud or Gemini or one of these publicly accessible chatbots, typing in their legal problem and trying to get some advice from them. I couldn't find a general statistic about it, but I mean, a recent one said more than half of teenagers are using this on a daily basis. So I assume that's similar to the general population, but that's not super important. Okay, so that's the context to it. So the next question then for me is, okay, what is legal advice and what are they seeking and what am I concerned about? So I define legal advice as an opinion that applies legal principles to an individual factual circumstance with the objective of counseling appropriate actions. So obviously legal advice, and as you all probably know, it can be distinguished from legal information, which is just talking about legal principles in the abstract. So these help guides you find in the courthouses or on nonprofit groups, that's not legal advice. It's just, here's what the law is, here's what your rights are, here's how procedures work. That's different. That's legal information. Legal advice, however, is a different kettle of fish because it's saying this is what you should do in regards to your situation based on the law as it applies to you. So there is legal advice. It's different from legal information. But there's also a difference between good legal advice and bad legal advice. So to frame my research question a little better, what do we mean by effective legal advice? What do you expect from a competent lawyer? And here's some characteristics of effective legal advice. I'm sure we can think of more, but I think it's a good framing of effective legal advice. And I'm looking back here because I can't see up there. It's too small. So here I say the first thing we need to know about legal advice, effective legal advice, is a lawyer needs to be able to identify the objectives and best interest of their clients. Lawyers have a duty of candor, which means sometimes they have to tell their clients, this isn't in your interest. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do what you want to do. So that is the first thing. We need to know what the client needs and wants, and we need to advise them and identify what their objectives are. We also need to be able to elicit facts from individuals and documents. So this means if anyone's ever interviewed a client, you know they're not always telling you the whole truth, the whole story. So you need to be able to dig a little further. Good legal advice kind of parses out additional facts. They may need to interview other people. They may need to ask for specific documents, do some research. They need to know the whole story. They also need to research the relevant legal principles. This is what we think of a lawyer. They need to do the case law research, the statutory research, update it, make sure it's relevant, make sure it's up to date. And then they need to be able to analyze the fact set that they're given in light of the relevant law and be able to apply that to the client's position. And that's all very well and good. The next step then is explain to the client what the case is all about. Explain it clearly so that they can understand it. You can't get instruction from your client if they don't understand the legal problem. So there is an element here of communication to the client and then working with the client to develop some sort of strategy to best achieve their objectives. So there is this relationship component, and to me that seems like a pretty comprehensive idea of what we want from effective legal advice. This is how, or what we're looking for in our lawyers. Now, the next step to think about is the fact that legal advice is regulated, and the law societies jealously guard their right to determine who can give legal advice, who can provide legal services, and they often justify their regulation through with three justifications. And the first one, which is relevant to my question, is competency. The idea here is we need to regulate who can provide legal advice so that we can ensure that the people who are giving legal advice are giving competent advice, that the public can rely on that, and they're not going to be injured by that advice. And that's what this quote from the Model Code of Professional Conduct is speaking to. And it's basically saying that clients are entitled to assume that their lawyer is competent. And I use that as more or less my theoretical lens. If we can assume that legal advice is competent, then that's a big question of what do we think of generative AI legal advice? But two other reasons we regulate legal advice has to do with confidentiality. We need to ensure that the lawyers are keeping their client's business in confidence. They will be disciplined and they can get in trouble if they breach that confidence. And we also want to make sure that lawyers are accountable if they screw up or give bad advice, that the clients have some means of redress. So here they can sue their lawyer, or they could go to the law society and file a complaint. When we're thinking about AI-generated legal advice, it's already missing 2 out of the 3 components. AI-generated legal advice cannot maintain confidentiality, so we have a problem there. Anything you put into a model goes back into its training, is now owned by a third party, can be sold to other people. So generally speaking, we should be concerned about that with AI-generated advice. And then there's an issue of accountability. If one is harmed by relying on bad AI-generated advice, I don't think there's a method of accountability yet. Maybe down the road we'll have a lawsuit where someone sues one of these big companies, but I think that's going to be an uphill battle. And either way, we're not there yet. So we're already missing 2 out of the 3. My research question, as I said, really focuses on that first one. Is it competent nonetheless? Okay. So how did I approach this question? Well, I developed this little project. First and foremost, I created 2 fictitious legal problems. The first one was an employment-based problem, more or less, a workplace injury, then a denial of accommodations, leading to a termination of employment. And then the second one was this fictitious event about a custodial dispute where they want to move children out of jurisdiction and then vary a support order. These represent personal plight problems. They're problems that are common to Canadians or representative of common type of problems. They are multi-layered. They're quite serious. There's multiple areas of resolution. So I thought they were good problems to kind of challenge what type of legal advice I'd get. I inputted those problems into 3 chatbots. So Cloud, ChatGPT, and Gemini. I wanted a little bit of a comparison. I chose these ones because they are publicly accessible. So I don't know, maybe something like Lexis AI might give a better response, but the public doesn't have access to Lexis AI. So where is the average layperson who has such an employment problem or family problem going to go? They're going to go to ChatGPT or Cloud or Gemini. These companies also represent some of the largest market share, so very likely that's where they're going. I took the outputs and I gave them to a few lawyers. I purposely chose a very small sample size for a number of reasons, some practical, some methodological. The practical reason is if I want to turn this into a bigger project, I want to make sure I ask the right questions before I go off to 100 lawyers. So let's start with 4 or 5, or I got 4 in the end, and make sure I did it right. The second thing is practicality. As you can see, I looked at ChatGPT 5. We're already on a new model, so this stuff moves quickly. I need to move quickly. But methodologically speaking, going back to that statement here, if a client is entitled to rely on a lawyer's legal advice as being competent, then I can just rely on one lawyer telling me that this is good advice. At least that's my theoretical lens here. My idea here is I'm not looking at what does the legal profession think of this. I'm looking at the question, is this good legal advice? One lawyer should be able to identify it and say, yes, this is good. No, it is not. So I surveyed these 4 lawyers. They're practitioners in the field. They work in this area of law, so they know it. And I gave them 10 closed questions, then an open-ended questions just for their thoughts, and then an overall rating. So what are the themes? This is where we get into, all right, tell me the answer. Okay, first and foremost, one thing they all noted was that the advice was presented clearly. So the chatbots did a good job of communicating the legal advice, taking some pretty complicated legal themes, communicating it effectively, understandably, free of legal jargon, etc. Not a bad job there. However, the advice was incomplete. So the law that these chatbots and the issues they spotted were generally correct and good law. They weren't wrong per se, but they tend to be missing things. They tend to not examine every issue. It wasn't fully comprehensive, which is a little worrisome. And even more worrisome is that the advice did contain errors. So generally, the law itself was correct, but there are a number of things it did wrong. Like it would pull out wrong phone numbers. At one point, it identified a courthouse that didn't exist for 10 years. Sometimes they reference the wrong legislation. So this kind of wraps up into our concern about hallucinations. And then lastly, another thing they commented on is it didn't evaluate all the options. It kind of said, here's what you can do, and that's that. They didn't go into all sorts of other strategies. It didn't go into other recommendations. It was kind of linear, which to me reflects the idea of it's not asking for all the facts or investigating the facts or challenging it. ChatGPT and the other chatbots, they answer what you want to hear. So they only really answer the question you ask. Just some other responses from the survey that I took. They were good at identifying all the relevant issues. These bots or these chatbots were good at providing an accurate summary of the law. Typically speaking, it was clear, concise, free of legal jargon. Some of the ones I found more interesting, though, was it was really bad at strategizing or letting the client know the scope of the problem. It was really bad at setting expectations. It never would say, this is what it's going to cost you to litigate, or this is how long it's going to take. Doesn't tell you it's going to take 4 years to, go to trial and receive a judgment. So there's that. So in conclusion, one last slide, because we like numbers. I like numbers anyway. So if you want just like a simple graph, how good is this stuff? I asked them to evaluate these bots on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being, fully comprehensive advice, accurate advice, the advice you'd expect from a competent lawyer, 1 being completely incompetent and misleading, and basically ChatGPT and stuff landed right in the middle. This is your know-it-all cousin that thinks they know everything, and they're mostly correct, but not there. Just as a comparator, ChatGPT was typically seen as doing a better job than Gemini, and Cloud was kind of in the middle. So what's the conclusion? Back to my research question, can AI-generated legal advice provide safe, reliable, and effective assistance to those with serious legal problems? Can it identify the objectives and best interests of the client? I would say no. It doesn't challenge the client. It just answers what the client wants to hear. It doesn't say that's not the right question. So it can't identify the objectives and best interests. Can it elicit facts from individuals and documents? I would say no, because it doesn't. Sometimes it would ask for follow-ups, clarity. Are we in Nova Scotia? Is this the right jurisdiction, et cetera? But generally speaking, it didn't really ask for beyond that. It didn't look for the other side of the story. Is it good at researching relevant legal principles? Absolutely. It's a great research tool. I would suggest, though, it's a research tool that is most effective in the hands of those who know what they're doing. Because I would be concerned about hallucinations. And if you're a layperson that doesn't know whether this is correct law or the legal principles, how to update law, it might be concerning. But generally speaking, it was great at identifying the right law. Can it analyze facts in light of the law? Yes, it did a good job of that. It did provide, based on the input, it did provide a pretty good analysis of the right law. Can it explain it clearly and concisely? Absolutely. Great at speaking in plain language. Can it develop a strategy? No, it cannot. So what is the conclusion? In terms of confidentiality, we know it doesn't work. In terms of accountability, it doesn't work. And in terms of competence, well, it gets 3 out of 6, so a good 50%. And, D's get degrees, so sure. Again, the access to justice question, maybe it's okay. This is kind of what I said in my last one about This is what I said in my last paper about crowdsourced legal advice, that it's cautiously optimistic, that if you have nothing else, you can't afford a lawyer, you have no idea to go, maybe it's better than nothing. But use it with a grain of salt and know what you're getting into. And there's certainly a caveat emptor element here, which is probably a good segue into the People's Law School, because I think this is where, it could be used when People's Law School and nonprofits get into this realm. So I'll leave it there, and thank you.
Thanks for that setup, Matthew. Yeah, no, we did not discuss Matthew doing that handoff beforehand. My name is Drew Jackson. I'm the digital and content lead from People's Law School, a nonprofit in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I want to talk about an example of using AI in a way that I think can be for good. AI has a lot of concerns for many, myself included, in many aspects, from environmental to job displacement. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. I want to walk you through an example of how at our nonprofit we're using AI in what we would call a people-centered way to help British Columbians navigate legal problems with a generative AI-powered chatbot called Beagle Plus. So I want to walk through three different components here over the next 15 minutes. One is a few minutes on the problem, the justice gap everybody will be familiar with, but I also want to talk about what we call the implementation gap in our work, and then give you some examples of how Beagle Plus works and why it's different from a generic AI tool like the ones that Matthew is testing with his research exploration. And then in the third portion, break down a bit how we built Beagle Plus and took a people-centered way to the content development, to the testing, and to the ongoing monitoring. So to set the stage a bit more around the work we do, we're a small nonprofit. We have an annual budget of about $1 million. We're 9 people. We serve British Columbia. We reach about 1 million British Columbians every year through a couple of websites, peopleslawschool.ca, where we focus on everyday legal problems, and Dylag Law, where we have starting point information across the full span of legal problems. And then we offer monthly webinars. We have print publications, a Q&A service, and more recently, a Gen AI-powered chatbot, all of which are trying to help people resolve and avoid legal problems with legal education and information. So a bit about the problem. We're all familiar with the justice gap, the excellent research that Stats Canada led with the Department of Justice from 2021, the Canadian Legal Problems Survey. We all know this stat, I think, in our sleep now, that just 1/3 of Canadians reported contacting a legal professional to resolve a serious legal problem, a shockingly low number that are getting access to professional assistance from a person. And what was striking to us as well about the results of that study, that survey, was how one of the other questions was, where did you go for help? And building on where did you go for help, how helpful was it, the routes that you took? And contacting a legal professional was rated as the most helpful path, with 77% of respondents saying that was helpful. But interestingly, other options were rated as very close in helpfulness, including searching the internet. 70% said that was helpful. And contacting friends and family, 73%. And contacting a community organization like our nonprofit at People's Law School, 63%. That wasn't the stat for People's Law School specifically. In fact, we ask everybody that has contact with us, how helpful were we? And last year we reached our highest level ever at 87% of people that we reached in various ways, including our chatbot, and we'll learn more about this, said that our information and education was helpful. Okay, a little bit more on the problem. Implementation gap. This is a quote from a member of the Access to Justice BC working group a few years ago. One of the greatest challenges people experience in accessing justice is translating the legal information available into the context of their own situation. And this person was a self-litigant navigating their own family law problem for many years. And we see this in our work at People's Law School every single day, that people struggle to understand what the information available, even when it's high quality, curated information, plain language, jurisdiction specific, like what we offer at People's Law School, what that means for their own situation. So we have coverage on our People's Law School site of, among many other everyday legal problems, problems with a used car that you've bought that turns out to be problematic. And people contact us on a weekly basis, more often than that even, on what does that information, as good as it is, as we think, and they agree as good, as what does it mean for my own situation? And so this is where we have found our generative AI-powered chatbot to be really quite transformative, I would suggest. And so I'm going to talk a bit, give a few examples to get things going. But I'm going to highlight in these examples 3 different ways that it's helping people. It's getting them to relevant information. It's coaching them on how to apply the law to their situation. Okay, I know this is a bit subtle around like legal advice, but I'm going to, I think, try to persuade you on how, through these examples, it's coaching them to apply the law themselves, and then empowering them to take action. So here, first example of 3, this is somebody who has asked, as a manager, and I think of my 20-something daughter who was a supervisor at Starbucks as being the one who was this wasn't her. These are real questions that people ask. And she did not ask this question, but she did ask us this question. I'm a supervisor, I'm 20, and I'm being told I don't get stat holiday pay. Am I entitled to statutory holiday pay under the Employment Standards Act? And Beagle starts off a response. Many managers are not covered by the stat holiday rules, and then goes on to unpack this a bit and provides a link to information on our website. This is critical. We're using what's called retrieval augmented generation with our use of AI. And it is basically using our entire website ecosystem to provide answers to questions. So it's not going out to the generic AI large language model exclusively to provide a response. And so then it walks people through here, the person through, what this can mean for their situation. So if you're a manager, you may not be entitled to stat holiday pay, but you also may have rights through your employment contract. And to sort this out, it comes down to whether you're truly a manager under the rules versus a title, and invites the person to put in, tell me a bit more about your situation, and I'll guide you through applying that to your situation. I'm going to cut to a second example to show you this guiding or coaching in a different context. So here's somebody who's asking, when buying a used car, your website says when buying a used car from a dealer, the car legally has to be durable for a reasonable period of time. How long is that period of time? And so the response starts with, this is stated in the law, and what counts as reasonable depends on the situation. And it can include factors like, and it lists out the factors, the age and condition of the vehicle, the price paid, nature of the problem, and so on. Provides a link to relevant info. And then unpacks this a little bit more with the car's age and kilometers. Oh, sorry, I realized this slide deck missed a slide. So it then asked, tell me a bit more about your situation, and I'll guide you through this. And the respondent put in, I've got a Mini Cooper from 2010. I paid $3,000 and the engine blew the first day I got it. And so then it walks the person through a major failure 1 week after, it was 1 week, sorry, can support an argument the car wasn't reasonably durable, but the car's age, kilometers, and low price counter that. So it's giving people some context here without saying you here is exactly my opinion. It's guiding them on how to apply the law to their own situation. And then the third example I want to highlight, how it's empowering people to take action. So this is a context where someone asks, how do I remove my sister from being my mom's power of attorney? She's treating my mom terribly and taking money from her bank account. And so the chatbot offers, it depends, in British Columbia, a lot on whether your mom still has mental capacity to understand what it means to end the power of attorney. If she does, then she can revoke the power of attorney, and here's wording that she can use. And then if your mom does not have capacity, then she can't revoke the power of attorney herself. One option for you is to report the misuse to the Public Guardian and Trustee, a public agency in British Columbia that looks at financial abuse of people who have lack of capacity, and then walks them through practical next steps that they can take for this problem. So empowering people to take action. So hopefully with those three examples, you got a sense of how the chatbot works and how it's different from generic AI. And just a couple other pieces to fill out the picture of our experience in the 2 years now since we have had Beagle Plus available through our People's Law School and Dialogue websites. We've had 17,000 British Columbians have conversations with it. 83% in that 2-year period have said it was helpful. It's using this retrieval augmented generation approach, which has 1 million words in it from our curated content. We're using ChatGPT 5.2 now, and the annual cost of that ChatGPT portion of things is actually under $1,000. The helpfulness piece, we've seen that the helpfulness has increased over the 2 years we've been operating this chatbot. Since we cut over about a year ago to what was then the latest model, 4.1, we're now on 5.2, we cut over in the winter, the helpfulness rating has gone up from the mid-70s to averaging 90% now. And the ways that people report that Beagle Plus is helping is really impactful, we find. So people saying it provided the legal context that I lacked and suggested useful next steps. Then others saying, this quote, we hear regularly this kind of reaction. I've been avoiding starting this process because it's so stressful, but thanks to your information and guidance, I'll get started. So empowering people. And then a quote around leveling the playing field when the other side has a lawyer and they're representing themselves. And an example of how it's helping people prepare for meeting with a lawyer. And how it's giving suggestions for when it's particularly important to get legal advice. So I'll wrap up with a couple of the key building blocks and how we're taking a people-centered approach to content, to testing, and to monitoring. So our content at People's Law School, we have made a priority over the last number of years to make it more people-centered than ever. We have close to 200 now first-person questions and answered published on the site in this form. I got X, what do I do? And then a response to that. Those are real questions that have come into us that we've anonymized, we've seen patterns. Many people ask similar questions. We also have 350 first-person user stories embedded throughout all of our content. We've taken a people-centered approach to testing, where we created a test data set before we launched this Gen AI chatbot over 2 years ago. And those were drawn from real questions that had arrived in various ways before our team and from people in British Columbia. They covered a mix of topics, issues our content does and doesn't cover, some featuring recent changes in the law. And then we ran those through many iterations of what were then the various leading models from AI companies with different parameters, if you will. And our team of lawyers reviewed every response on safety and accuracy, or sorry, safety and value, pardon me. Safety includes accuracy. And as part of that testing, we created an ideal response and key points a chatbot response should cover. So here's that question around removing my sister from being my mom's power of attorney, where we crafted an ideal response and then highlighted a number of things that the ideal chatbot response would cover, or that it should cover. And then our team, as I said, tested across various iterations and rated each response on this safety and value paradigm with safe, unsafe, very unsafe, particular lot at stake, and then very valuable, valuable, not valuable. And between early and late in our testing, the responses got more consistently safe and valuable. I'll spare you the details of what we were tuning in getting to that place. And as we were about to launch 2 years ago, that bottom part where it's almost all green but not quite, a key breakthrough was learning that if we tweaked the underlying content that our chatbot was working with, it actually resulted in that final response that was problematic being safe. So there's a virtuous feedback loop, and we've seen this many, many times since we've been live with Beagle Plus. And we've maintained a 99% accuracy rating. We continue to review everything throughout this 2-year period that we've been operating Beagle Plus. I'll skip through these final slides because we're running out of time, but we've used that testing data set again a few different times through the journey as we considered migrating to the more recent models. We saw a big jump in GPT 4.1 becoming more and more valuable. Our user feedback confirms that. And to wrap up, we monitor attentively by our team of people, our lawyers on staff, and we're continuing to assess everything for safety and for value. And we also use automated scoring now, so AI, measuring AI, and following the degree to which those are in alignment, our people review and our automated review. And they're getting more in alignment, but not quite there yet. And then we actually grounded that one final people-centered piece here, that rubric that we are using around safety and value in an incredible human-centered set of standards for quality legal AI, so legal question and answer response, developed by Stanford Legal Design Lab, using a human-centered approach with groups of people informing what is important to people in getting a response from a lawyer or from a chatbot, whatever it might be, and what are safety critical factors. It's an incredible piece of work. And we're delighted to be working with Stanford now on a study that is going to be potentially a groundbreaking study in this space, exploring the quality of our chatbot's responses and comparing them against human lawyer responses for accuracy and helpfulness. And if you want to learn more about Beagle Plus, the URL's on the screen, peopleslawschool.ca/Beagle. Thank you.
Putting a timer for myself. Thank you. Those were excellent presentations, and they really helped set the scene for us here in terms of what we think about in terms of the impact of algorithms and AI within different contexts. So we had Christiane's comments about the broader framework in the access to justice framework, the limits of AI-generated legal advice, and then, in fact, some ways in which the legal advice can be provided in a limited and practical way from the People's Law School. I want to take a few minutes to talk and take this conversation in a slightly different direction, which is talking about the administrative law context. Yeah, there we go. And what happens when the state is using AI and automated decision making. And it sort of goes back to something that came up in the last panel that was in this room as well, of how do we think about systemic change. And I want to take a few minutes to talk about the choices on the side of, for example, the government in terms of how they're using AI is directly impacting questions around access to justice. When we think about the interaction of individuals with justice and the law, yes, it includes the court system, but it oftentimes includes administrative law, right? So we're talking about accessing social benefits, healthcare, education, human rights protections, immigration, which is an area that I work specifically in. And that's where people are meeting the state, and increasingly the state, the government, administrative bodies are using AI and automated decision-making, which takes us away from what we traditionally thought about and the legal advice that we might traditionally have thought of in those circumstances where an individual was making a determination, to a completely different system where AI and automated decision-making is giving us outputs. And it's not clear whether those outputs are in fact based on principles of fairness, accountability, and meaningful participation. So I want to talk about that gap and how putting more resources and advocacy on this can actually help clients and individuals essentially across the country when they do want to interact with the justice system here. Okay. It's very difficult to see back there. Okay. As I mentioned, I'm an immigration lawyer, so I come to you with a lot of data from the immigration context. And what we have seen over the past 5-6 years is increasing implementation of AI and automation in various AI-adjacent technological tools in the decision-making process. So if we think about, I'll give you a very simple example, an international student who applies for a study permit. They submit a fully digital application to the immigration department, and despite how complete it might be, if they're going to receive a refusal, they typically receive a very generic response, a templated letter, maybe some templated reasons as well that come from the same generic systems. And they really don't have an indication of what went wrong, why was it that their application was refused. And so the old question was the officer who reviewed this application making a determination that was reasonable based on the evidence before them and made in a fair manner? Was it based on the information, or was it maybe based on credibility finding and so on? But now we have a new question, which is, who even made this decision? Was it the officer who signs off on it as the human in the loop, or is it an entire system that's impacting that final outcome that the applicant gets, and they just don't know because of the opaque and non-transparent way in which the technology is being used on the back end without enough information to individuals interacting with the system to understand that. So we've moved from, I think, and this is a fundamental shift that we're seeing within administrative law, we're moving from our standard sort of traditional model that we've had for the past 50, 70 years, that the courts have come to recognize the governance, the legality of administrative decisions based on these concepts of, was it a reasonable decision? We have who we believe are competent decision makers, officers, board members, ministers, and so on, who are delegated this authority to make determinations, and they weigh the evidence and they provide us with reasons for their final decision. And we can look at that record and say, if we think it's a reasonable decision, if we think it was a fair decision in terms of how it was made. We've moved far away from that. We certainly moved away from that within the immigration context, but we're seeing that more and more in other areas too. So you can think about your tax return. If you filed it this year, you probably got almost instantly a notice of assessment, right? It's happening across the board. but it's quite visible in the area that we work with. And so what we see now is technology or AI-supported decision-making. Applications are triaged, they're impacted by risk factors. Officers who might be making that final determination see all of this external information that's risk indicators and potentially recommended outcomes. And so while we still work under this legal fiction that that's a human decision, oftentimes it's really a human in the loop at best, and a sort of rubber stamping of those administrative decisions. And we are certainly working towards a very realistic system in the future where we're going to have fully automated decision making, right? So where the data and the issues are going to be determined exclusively by the technology without any human interaction at all. We do see that a little bit in different places. As I said, within the immigration context, some of the approvals are already fully automated. Your notice assessment, if you're getting it within a day, is is fully automated. So the challenge is that we don't see how those decisions are being made. It's invisible what's happening on the back end. And if I go back again to the immigration context, it's a high volume area, right? So again, outside of the CRA that's doing 30 plus million assessments per year, the immigration department is processing anywhere from 2 to 4 million applications. So this is certainly an area whether it's data rich, they've been able to experiment, and with the push for efficiency in making decisions more quickly, there's been a lot of experimentation. And typically, we also have seen language from the federal court that immigrants are generally afforded fewer procedural fairness rights. So it's a low rights environment where a lot of this testing takes place. And applicants, particularly if they are self-represented, which a large number of applicants in this space are, will have no idea when they get a decision letter how that decision actually came about. There's a complete disconnect between what the program requirements are and what the law, for example, says in terms of what a requirement for a particular visa is, and the way in which these various tools are coming together and guiding a final determination, and at the same time, even generating the reasons that are no longer an individual officer's reasons. So I mentioned right at the beginning that one of the organizations I work with and co-founded was the Artificial Intelligence Monitor for Immigration. And so we're trying to gather this information and try to understand how the technology is impacting the decision-making outcomes, but it's a huge task. And while our work over the last few years has helped improve transparency from the side of the government in terms of a little bit more information of what tools they use, there's still not enough. And I'll get to why I think that's important and what we can potentially do on that front. So, as I've already described, the gap there is if you're an individual that's interacting with the system, you don't know who made your decision. You have no idea what tools were used and how they impacted. And there's been some fantastic work done around the way in which technology can disperse the decision making. So it becomes impossible for us to say, was it the triaging of the application as high risk or low risk that made that final decision? Or was it, the risk indicators and so on? And so we don't really have that ultimate accountability piece either, right? Of how do we know how this decision actually came about? There's also, I know I'm working on limited time here, so there's a lot of information on the slide, but I want to get to the challenge that we face is we don't have a framework in place for assessing what is a reasonable or a fair decision that's made by an automated system. So as I said, we have an idea of if it's a human being, it doesn't have to be that we agree with the outcome. We just have to understand the process. We have to make sure that the evidence was reviewed. But we've all interacted with ChatGPT. You ask it to justify an acceptance of, or, are you for something it can? Are you against something it can? So one critical piece of this is actually making a determination of what it is that we want to think about as a fair and reasonable decision when that decision-making power has been fully delegated to automated decision-making systems. But in addition to that sort of new legal test that we need to set up, there are things that I think we need to think about within the administrative law context, and listening to some of the other panels, I'm thinking about, when you're the people coming to your organizations might be trying to seek housing, health supports, and so on. While they may be experimenting in those areas, they will certainly be using these kinds of technologies that are developed more and more in those spaces. And the challenge that the clients are facing or applicants are facing is that there's no obligation. I'll go through this very quickly. There's no obligation for disclosure. So we don't have that requirement that where AI or automated tools are being used, they have to be disclosed, or what role those tools actually have in the decision-making process. I think this is critical, and this is something we have to be pushing for, because if we don't know how decisions are made, it doesn't matter how many resources we provide to applicants, they're not going to be able to get fair outcomes, right? The reasons, unfortunately, are not explaining the way in which the decisions are made. I've just gone over that. The record is incomplete. We really don't have auditing and tracking of the way in which information, risk indicators, and so on are being presented to the decision makers, and how the AI is influencing that decision making outcome. And there's no audit trail. We see this in the immigration space very clearly, that the only indicator we have after a lot of lobbying and a lot of advocacy work is simply that a tool was used, one of at least 5 or 6 tools that impacts a decision. And it still doesn't track and audit and provide to applicants and to us as representatives what exactly happened to that decision and how that decision came about. So in terms of thinking about people-centered design, I think we really need to go back and continue to work and ask for and hold our government accountable in terms of providing transparency. Where are they using these tools? And Christiane talked about this earlier. We need to be at those tables in our specific areas much earlier, not when they've already developed tools and they're using it and then we're just finding out about it after the fact. We need to be at those tables when those tools are being designed. Are they going to work in the way that it's envisioned by the bureaucrats, or is it going to be something that will actually have impact from us as practitioners and people who are on the ground and dealing with it? Participation rights need to be able to have an opportunity to really understand and correct errors that arise, and make sure that it's not just a human in the loop, but that applicants actually have an opportunity to participate in that decision-making process, not that they just put in an application. That is not sufficient. And after a decision is made, the accountability piece, right? Having meaningful reasons, having access to information that was relied on in that decision-making, having independent oversight. This is going to be critical, I think, going forward, that the government and the Treasury Board, at the federal level, we have the Treasury Board Secretariat, and it has some guidance in terms of, how the government should be using AI and Gen AI internally, but there's nothing independent from that, and there's no independent oversight. And I think we need to continue to make a push for that. And I am at time, but I will leave you with this, that I think that efficiency is important. I'm not saying the government can't use AI and won't use AI, they will. It becomes a question of, if we are not advocating for the right uses of AI, and by that I mean focusing on fairness and so on, we're losing the opportunity to have a system that's actually working and accountable, and it's not just about getting those final results. Okay. Thank you. And with that, we have 3 minutes. Any questions? Yes. Maybe someone from here can also stand. Yeah, we can get a second question. Yeah.
My name is Kathy Batiki, and I'm a family law lawyer from Ontario. I'm here with the Canadian Bar Association Access to Justice Committee. I just wanted to make a comment and indicate something to you about Beagle Plus. I think it is generally wonderful. I went on to it and asked it a very simple family law question, and it came up with a pretty comprehensive answer with regard to when a child might be able to give evidence in court. But I then asked it a question, can I sue for damages for my husband refusing to let me have money and hits me if I ask? And it gave the wrong answer because the Supreme Court of Canada just came out with a new tort in the last 2 weeks that says that there is now a new tort of intimate partner violence, which will allow a person to sue for damages for the tort of intimate partner violence, which includes coercive control. So I just point this out to you that you got to make sure that you're updating the law all the time on your chatbot, because the law does change fairly quickly. But other than that, I think it's wonderful, and I'd like you to expand it to Ontario. But you have to just be careful with it because now that women, particularly women, but now that people know that they can potentially sue for damages, if they can't afford to go to a lawyer, they're going to go to something like this if they know about it, and you got to make sure that the answer is correct.
Well,
Up
thank
to date.
you for spotlighting that critical part of any legal information offering, and you'll be happy to know we've got a Q&A coming up in development right now, should be on our site next week, and Beagle gets the information that night after we add information to our website, and anything we change on our website, it knows about it that very night, and anybody asking the next day will have that updated information. So by next week, I invite you to try that again and give us feedback about whether the response to that follow-up question is now recognizing that the Supreme Court of Canada very recently made a significant change in the law in that area.
Hi, my name's Maris Bray. I'm a librarian at the University of Windsor, and I also teach advanced legal research to baby lawyers. So one thing very quickly on the auditability, I think that ship has sailed, and we're done on that for any advanced AI. Why is, I believe it was ChatGPT, obsessed with goblins? We don't know. It's a black box. More importantly, in your steps for identifying a competent answer, a good answer, I think you missed a really important step. You went from get facts to research relevant legal principles. There is another step in there. Identify what those principles are from what someone has brought you. Talking to baby lawyers, they're not very good at that. They're not very good at taking a narrative and extracting what is the actual legal principle at play. What area of law is it? I get questions, I'm like, what area of law is this? I don't know. Is it contracts? Maybe. And that's partially because of how law school is taught. You take your contracts course, all your questions are about contracts. So is AI better at extracting what is actually at play? Because humans, not so much.
I'm so sorry that I will not allow him to respond to that because we have to move out of here and it has to be reshaped. But thank you everyone for coming, and we'll be around. If you have questions, please come up and ask us. Thank you.